Hello friends, my topic is species. Types of species. Let's see what is species or what are species. According to Cuvier in 1892, the species is assemblage descended from one another or from common parents and those who resemble each other. Okay, what Cuvier has defined the species. Species is the assemblage descended from one another or from common parents and those who resemble each other. According to Thomson, species as the group of individuals distinguished by an inducible set of constant properties and connected by descent and genetic relationship. Thomson said that species are inducible set of constant properties have possessing inducible set of constant properties and are connected by descent and genetic relationship. And finally, according to Huxley in 1942, the species can be regarded as a geographically definable group whose members actually interbreed or are potentially capable of interbreeding in nature, which normally in nature does not interbreed freely or with full fertility with related group and is distinguished from them by constant morphological differences. So, Huxley says that species are capable of interbreeding in nature and the members are distinguished by their morphological differences. Okay, species is the most specific major taxonomic rank. Taxonomic literature report innumerable number of species concepts, which means there are innumerable number of species concepts in which the taxonomy literature are reported. Mayer in 1953 viewed all these concepts of species and grouped them under three broad headlines. What are the headlines? Typological species concept, nominalistic species concept, and third one is the biological species concept. Two more species concepts have been elucidated as evolutionary or phylogenetic species concept, and fifth one is recognition species concept. So totally there are 5 species concepts are reported in taxonomic literature. The first one is typological species concept, then second one nominalistic species concept, and the third one is biological species concept, fourth evolutionary or phylogenetic species concept, and finally recognition species concept. Now let's see the different types of species. First one, polytypic species. So let's move to polytypic species. It is now a well accepted fact that some species are widely distributed and form many local populations. That we all know species are widely distributed and they form local populations. If these species are sufficiently distinct from each other, they are called subspecies. Okay, what is subspecies? If these species which are widely distributed and form many local populations are sufficiently distinct from each other, then they are called subspecies. Species which contain two or more subspecies are called polytypic species. So what is polytypic species? Species which contain two or more subspecies, then they are called polytypic species. And those which not divided into subspecies are called monotypic species. And what is monotypic species? Those which not divided into subspecies are called monotypic species. Beckner, a scientist named Beckner in 1959 was the first to put forward the concept of polytypic species. Smith, a scientist named Smith in 1962, the proponent of numerical taxonomy, used polythetic and monothetic terms in place of polytypic and monotypic respectively. What Smith has done, he proposed the terms polythetic and monothetic in the place of polytypic and monotypic respectively. The concept of polytypic species was most important development in the classification of animal Certain local species that had been described from various parts of the world can be combined into species group because they were obviously more close to any other species and lives in mutually exclusive geographical area. So, certain local species that had been described from various parts of the world can be combined into one species group. So, what certain species that are located or they are living in different or various part of the world can be combined into a species group. They're called allopatric species because they were obviously more close to any other species and lives in mutually exclusive geographical area. What they are living in mutually exclusive geographical area. When the gap between the ranges of allopatric species are explored, that is, allopatric species integrated with one another, these allopatric species are included into a single polytypic species. So, how polytypic species are raised? When the gap between the ranges of allopatric species are explored, that is, allopatric species integrated with one another. So, two allopatric species, when combined, it forms or they integrate to form polytypic species, or they are considered as a single polytypic species. This concept has greatly simplified the classification of groups like birds, animals, snails, butterflies, among insects, etc. So, the concept of polytypic species have greatly simplified the classification of the group of birds, mammals, snails, butterflies, insects, etc. The reclassification of all allopatric forms originally described separately as monotypic species has resulted in tremendous simplification of the classification of classificatory system. As we said in the previous slide, the classification is very much simplified due to the introduction of these types of concepts like monotypic and polytypic species. Such works are almost completed in birds. Okay, this simplification of the classification of birds are almost completed. This concept gives rise to a new thinking in taxonomy called the population taxonomy. So these concepts are a way to the formation of population taxonomy. But it is not easy to apply polytypic species concept because still there is no foolproof method of recognizing such species, although good work have been done by Wilson, Brown, Herberg, Mayer and others on this subject. So, but technically it is not easy to apply polytypic species concept because still there is no foolproof for this method or for recognizing such species. But some good works have done by Wilson and Brown in 1953, Herberg in 1958, Mayer and others on this subject. Now let's see what are the examples of polytypic species. Some examples are given here. Panthera tigris, Panthera tigris amionsis, Panthera tigris altaica, Panthera tigris sonadaica, etc. Now let's see what is subspecies. We have already discussed in the previous slide what is subspecies. Now we can move to some more detailed version. Okay, it is a basic and universal fact that all species vary, and it has been known since long that certain species split into subspecies and races. We all know that all species vary, and it has been known since long that certain species split into subspecies, that is, certain species split into subspecies and races. Linnaeus and Fabricius prefer to call them varieties. So, Linnaeus and Fabricius prefer to call the subspecies as varieties. The ornithologist H. Schlegel was introduced the term subspecies. So the term subspecies was introduced by H. Schlegel and it is defined as a geographically separate aggregate of local population of the species. So what is subspecies? They are geographically separate aggregation of local population of the species. There are many subspecies like geological subspecies, ecological subspecies, polytypic subspecies, temporal subspecies, seasonal subspecies, etc. So we can see many types of subspecies like the subspecies can be classified into geological subspecies, ecological subspecies, polytypic subspecies, temporal subspecies, seasonal subspecies, etc. Now let's move to monotypic species. When a genus includes a single species but does not include any subspecies, they are called monotypic species. So, monotypic species include a single species and they does not possess any subspecies. That is, a monotypic species is one that does not include subspecies or smaller intraspecific tags. In the case of genera, the term unispecific or monospecific is sometimes performed. So the terms unispecific or monospecific are used in the case of genera. So examples of monotypic species are Vampyroteuthis, a vampire squid which is a single monotypic genus and also a single species named Vampyroteuthis infernalis. So Vampyroteuthis possesses only a single monotypic genus and a single species called Vampyroteuthis infernalis. And other example is Aardvark is the only species in the order Tubulidendata. The family Cephalotaceae include only one genus Cephalotus and only one species Cephalotus follicularis. So these are the examples. The examples are mentioned here. And in monotypic species, the species or organism is not divided into subspecies. In polytypic species, the organism are divided into subspecies at least two. Here the difference between monotypic and polytypic species is mentioned. So monotypic species does not possess or not divided into subspecies. In polytypic species, the organisms are divided into subspecies. Typically, members of a monotypic species classification live within close proximity to one another and share a high degree of biological similarity. Because no real distinction can be made among the population members, it is considered monotypic. So, the members of monotypic species are close proximity to one another and they share high degree of biological similarity, so there is no real distinction between the members. So now superspecies. The scientist named Mayer in 1931 introduced this term. It is defined as a monophyletic group of closely related and largely or entirely allopathic species. It's a monophyletic group of closely related species and largely or entirely allopathic species. The doubtful population which could not be kept in species or subspecies were kept under new term semi-species to mark their intermediate nature. So there is another kind of species called semi-species which could not be kept in species or subspecies. They are intermediate, so they are called semi-species. This category can be intercalated as usual in the hierarchy between species and subspecies. So they are between the category, or they in the hierarchy they are placed in between species and subspecies. So superspecies are placed in between species and subspecies. A scientist named Simpson in 1961 Superspecies are defined as group of population that seems on other grounds, morphology, ecology, etc., to have passed beyond the point of potential interbreeding and to have acquired separate evolutionary role, but that are not demonstrated to have done so by the more conclusive evidence of remaining separate when sympatry. So Simpson defined that when considering the grounds like morphology, ecology, etc., the suspicious have passed beyond the point of potential interbreeding and have to acquire a separate evolutionary role. It is to be presumed that they are still near the critical point of speciation. So superspecies are still near the critical point of speciation and that of definite isolation. They possess a definite isolation and it cannot be quite certain whether they are readily past that point or not just below it. And also, superspecies are nascent species when survived shall collectively form a subgenus or eventually a genus. So when they survive and shall, they can be collectively form a subgenus or eventually genus, but have hardly yet reached that degree of divergence and expression and expansion. So but they have hardly yet reached the degree of divergence and expansion. So they are not reached that point of degree of divergence and expansion. Some workers recognize two types of superspecies. So, some scientists have discovered two types of superspecies, that are geographical superspecies and chronological superspecies. Next, we are going to move to morphospecies. So, what is morphospecies? What are morphospecies? A taxonomic species based wholly on morphological difference from related species. It is a taxonomic species based wholly on morphological difference from related species. The morphospecies concept tries to explain speciation by looking at similarity in structures from species to next. So, morphospecies concept try to explain the speciation by looking at similarity in structures. We all know morphology means the external features. Here, the similarity in structures are considered to explain the speciation. One example of this is mammalian forelimbs. Example of these are mammalian forelimbs. A human, a cat, a whale and a bat all have similar forelimbs. Because of these similarities in morphological structure, scientists can deduce some sort of common ancestor which contain these structures. So some scientists have argued that, or they deduce some sort of common ancestry among these morphospecies due to their similarities in morphological structures. It is much harder to deduce this is for something such as bat and human. This concept of common ancestry cannot be applied or not worth when we considering a bat and human, but there are many cases in which this concept can be more directly applied. Example for species are different species of finches. Due to their different beak size and shape, they share a common ancestry, we can say like that. Next, we will move to ecospecies and cenospecies. Ecospecies is a group of plants having one or more ecotype within the cenospecies whose members are able to interchange their genes without a determinant to the offspring. So, ecospecies are a subgroup of cenospecies having one or more ecotype and whose members are able to interchange their genes. The term is coined by Turson, and a scientist named Zugel described ecospecies as a group of plants comprised whose members are interfertile among themselves but are prevented from free intercrossing with other groups by either complete or partial genetic barrier. So Zugel described ecospecies as the members as a group of plants whose members are interfertile. The important point is here is the interfertile. So the members are interfertile among themselves but are prevented from free intercrossing. So they are prevented from free intercrossing with other groups. It is also a unit of classification and it is considered as equal to species of classical taxonomy. So it is a unit of classification and it is also considered as equal to species of the classical taxonomy. So now what is xenospecies? It is a group of plants that representing one or more ecospecies of common evolutionary origin so far as morphological, cytological and experimental facts indicate. So xenospecies is a group of plants which consist of one or more ecospecies. We already mentioned that ecospecies are a subgroup of xenospecies. So xenospecies comprises one or more ecospecies and they possesses a common evolutionary origin when we considering the morphological, cytological and experimental aspects. Xenospecies of similar Cambarium is separated through genetic barriers and all hybrid among them are sterile. So, xenospecies of similar Cambarium is separated through genetic barriers. They are the xenospecies of similar Cambarium are separated through genetic barriers. Genetic barriers are applied to the xenospecies of similar Cambarium and all hybrid among them are sterile. The term is coined by Turson. If one or more ecospecies are included in a xenospecies, which is frequently equivalent of subgenus of classical taxonomy. So, as we mentioned, xenospecies comprises one or more ecospecies. So, it can be considered or which is frequently equivalent to the subgenus of classical taxonomy. So, next is species complex. In biology, species complex is a group of closely related organisms that are so similar in appearance that our boundaries between them are often unclear. So, species complex is defined as a group of closely related organisms that are so similar in appearance that the boundaries between them are often unclear. So species complex possesses closely related species that they are similar in appearance. The terms that are used synonymously but have more precise meaning are cryptic species and sibling species. So some terms are synonymously used for species complex. The one is cryptic species. For two or more species hidden under one species is called cryptic species, and sibling species is for two cryptic species that are each other's closest relative. Next is this term species flock. It's a group of closely related species that live in the same habitat. So species flock is a group of closely related species that live in the same habitat. A species complex in most cases a monophyletic group with a common ancestor. So species complex is in most cases they are a monophyletic group with a common ancestor. Species complex exists in all group of organisms. They are identified by the vigorous study of difference between individual species that uses minute morphological details. So here the morphological details are minutely identified or analyzed. They are identified by a rigorous study. So species complex are formed by the vigorous study on the difference between morphological characteristics, test of reproductive isolation, molecular phylogenetic DNA barcoding are used for the morphological details, or they are the tools that used for uh, forming a species complex. Existence of extremely similar species may cause local and global species diversity. So, local and global species diversity are the result of existence of extremely similar species. So, guys, that's all for the for my topic. Thank you, everyone.